I just wanted people to know who he was. I want this music. I don't want it to disappear on his laptop.
Hollywood is a place that creates heroes, but not everyone can remain one once they step off the set. And Gary Sinise is the clearest example of that. He was Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, a role that brought his name to millions of viewers around the world. A career-defining performance praised for its symbolism, its emotional depth, and its humanity. But behind the screen, Gary Sinise lived a life more painful than any film could ever portray. His wife battled cancer. His son was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, gradually lost his ability to move, and eventually passed away at the age of 33. Gary walked away from Hollywood, turned down roles, and stepped out of the spotlight to become a caregiver. Nearly 6 years spent quietly at his son's bedside, without speaking to the press, without asking for pity. It was only after his son's death that he spoke up. Not to seek sympathy, but to do something that stunned everyone. Gary Sinise is no longer just an actor. He is a father, a soldier, a man who fully embraced the greatest role of his life, not on screen, but in the real world. What really happened to Gary Sinise, and how did he face such a brutal truth? This is the story of Gary Sinise, a quiet hero with the heart of a warrior and the grief of a father. Gary Sinise was born in 1955 in Blue Island, a working-class area on the south side of Chicago. His father was a documentary filmmaker, his mother a teacher. Gary's childhood was marked not by any standout moments, but by a sense of disconnection. He was the kind of student who struggled to focus, had difficulty learning, and would likely be diagnosed with a learning disorder if born today. He was a poor reader, a weak writer, not particularly good at any subject, but he was great at one thing: dreaming. When he was 9, the family moved to Highland Park, a northern suburb of the city. Gary had to constantly adjust to new surroundings, new classmates. Changing schools only deepened his sense of isolation. His grades sank further, and he grew more withdrawn, feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. The unexpected escape came in a high school hallway. One day, while Gary was playing guitar with his rock band friends, the drama teacher walked by and said, "I'm directing West Side Story. You guys look like gang members. Come audition." The struggling student said yes, not out of love for theater, but because he noticed the line of pretty girls waiting outside the casting room. Then something strange happened. Gary, who didn't understand the script at all, still managed to make the entire room laugh with his awkward, clumsy reading. He got a small role, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he had done something right. From that first performance, Gary knew he couldn't leave the stage. He threw himself into theater like a drowning man clinging to a lifeline. While his other grades remained poor, he lived in the theater, rehearsing lines, building sets, writing plays. He didn't have enough credits to graduate with his class, but he stayed an extra year just so he could keep acting. No one would have guessed that the kid failing classes, barely scraping by, would one day be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But that's Gary Sinise, a man never defined by his report card but by the things he refused to give up. Gary Sinise didn't go to college. After graduating high school a year late, he didn't head to New York or Los Angeles. Instead, he returned to a small warehouse in Highland Park, where, along with a few friends, he founded a theater group called the Steppenwolf Theater Company. None of them had formal training. None of them had money. But they all shared one thing: a love for the stage, as if it were the only place they could truly be themselves. In the beginning, they did everything on their own, writing scripts, acting, building sets, arranging chairs. Sometimes there were only a few dozen people in the audience. Once, the group performed for a class of school children sitting cross-legged on the floor, and still considered it one of the most important shows of their lives. For Gary, it was the act of creating art, not fame, that he was chasing. Steppenwolf gradually became a phenomenon in Chicago's independent theater scene. Plays directed by Gary, such as True West, began drawing critical acclaim. In 1985, the group brought a production to New York's Off-Broadway, with John Malkovich in the lead role. That moment transformed Steppenwolf from a humble warehouse troupe into a nationally recognized name. Gary Sinise was now seen as a gifted director, yet he still didn't leave Chicago, didn't chase Hollywood. It wasn't until the 1990s, after more than 15 years in theater, that Gary finally stepped into the world of film, bringing with him a classical, quiet, and introspective acting style into an industry increasingly driven by flash and speed. In 1992, he directed and starred in Of Mice and Men, an adaptation of Steinbeck's novel. The film earned strong critical acclaim, opening the door for Gary Sinise to enter the movie world with an unusual reputation. He wasn't a new face. He was the late arrival worth listening to. Then came a phone call. Paramount was casting a role for Lieutenant Dan, a legless war veteran in a film called Forrest Gump. Gary Sinise knew if there was ever a role he was meant to play, this was it. In 1994, Forrest Gump premiered, becoming one of the greatest cinematic achievements of the decade. The film won 6 Oscars, and in the minds of audiences, beyond Tom Hanks's innocent Forrest, another character left a lasting impact. Lieutenant Dan, the soldier who lost both his legs and his will to live. Gary Sinise didn't just play the role. He poured his own life, experiences, and compassion into the character. In the film, he used the rosary of his brother-in-law, a Vietnam War veteran, to wear around Dan's neck. He deeply understood how society looked at returning soldiers, the pitying eyes, the distance, the haunting sense of being forgotten. And he channeled all of it into Dan's bitter, angry, and ultimately peaceful gaze. This role transformed Gary's entire career. He received an Oscar nomination and was recognized across America. But instead of using that as a springboard for big leading roles, Gary continued to choose quiet parts. In Apollo 13, The Green Mile, Mission to Mars, Ransom. He didn't appear in many films, but each one made an impact. Because Gary didn't choose fame, he chose to stay true to himself. His television career also flourished. From 2004 to 2013, he starred in CSI NY, a series that ran for 9 seasons and attracted millions of viewers worldwide. The character of Mac Taylor, a disciplined, reserved, and principled man, seemed like an alternate version of Gary in real life. However, success in the entertainment industry was never his final destination. Right after Forrest Gump, Gary began getting involved in veterans advocacy. A month after the film's release, disabled American veterans invited him to speak, and there, he realized, the pain of real soldiers was far more brutal than anything portrayed on screen. From that moment, Gary began his second journey, this time as a companion and supporter of veterans, wounded soldiers, and Gold Star families. He formed the Lieutenant Dan Band and performed for free at over 500 military bases, from Iraq and Afghanistan to VA hospitals across the U.S. He didn't bring Hollywood to the troops. He brought respect and solidarity. In 2011, he founded the Gary Sinise Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping veterans, firefighters, police officers, medical personnel, and their families. As of 2024, the foundation has built over 80 free homes for severely wounded soldiers, funded more than 10,000 trips for Gold Star families, and raised hundreds of millions of dollars for rehabilitation, scholarships, and job training programs. At some point, people stopped referring to him as an Oscar-nominated actor and began calling him Gary of the Soldiers. They no longer asked what film he was working on, but which base he was performing at this week, how many homes he had helped build, or how many children orphaned by war he had supported. He played the role of a soldier once, but after that, he lived as one, for the rest of his life. And that is the role that made him immortal in the hearts of the public. Despite his fame, Gary Sinise has always lived like an ordinary man. Married to fellow actress Moira Harris since 1981, nearly 45 years together, raising 3 children in quiet, and always keeping his personal life separate from the glare of Hollywood. They once performed together on the Steppenwolf stage, once lived off spare change from small theater gigs, and they stayed together, not through sweet headlines in the press, but through years of enduring pain side by side, never leaving each other. The greatest tragedy struck at the end of 2016. First, Gary's father suffered a stroke and spent nearly a month in the hospital in critical condition. Gary was by his side the entire time. But before he could catch a breath, in January 2017, Moira, the woman who had walked with him through more than half a lifetime, was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. She went through 8 rounds of chemotherapy and 35 consecutive days of radiation, nausea, exhaustion, hospital stays, and then recovery, all in the span of a few months. Gary never left her side. And then, just when the storm seemed to have passed in May 2018, a doctor called Gary. He was sitting on the porch with his wife, discussing her next treatment. The doctor told him Mac, their youngest son, had been diagnosed with a large tumor on his sacrum. What seemed like pelvic pain from a bike accident turned out to be chordoma, a rare form of cancer with tumors growing close to the spine and notoriously difficult to treat. The disease can remain undetected for decades before surfacing. Mac entered a battle no one was prepared for. The first surgery took place in September 2018. For a while, things seemed stable. But by May 2019, the cancer returned. Faster, more aggressive, harder to control. Mac had to undergo 2 major spinal surgeries in 2020, one in the thoracic spine, one in the cervical, leaving him almost completely immobile. Vertebrae were removed and replaced with rods and screws. He could no longer bend, turn his head, and gradually lost the ability to walk. After the second surgery, the entire right side of his upper body was paralyzed. Only his left hand retained some feeling, with minimal wrist movement. In the first 8 months of 2020, Mac spent 6 of them hospitalized. Gary, who still had a TV show and performance contracts at the time, announced that he was stopping everything. "I can't leave home. From now on, I'm just a father." For 5 years, he stayed off air. No new roles, no scandals, just the quiet silhouette of a man pushing a wheelchair down hospital hallways. But what kept the family from collapsing was music. Mac had been a drummer at USC, had toured with rock bands, had lived the life of an artist. Now, he couldn't strike a single beat. But his mother, Moira, suggested, "If you can't play drums, try the harmonica." And Mac started over, from scratch, with one hand and a single breath. In January 2023, Mac decided to finish a piece he had started in college, Arctic Circles. An old friend from USC, Oliver Schneid, flew to Nashville to help him complete the arrangement. An orchestra was hired. A studio was booked. Mac sat in his wheelchair, unable to move from the waist down, but still directed every detail of the recording. His father and sister were present at the session, the first time they heard the piece, and everyone wept. Arctic Circles was Mac's final composition. But it wasn't the end. He went on to record Shenandoah, played on the very harmonica his mother gave him. Then came a full album, Resurrection and Revival. Mac passed away on January 5th, 2024, just days after the final recording session was completed. Gary didn't hold a grand funeral. He didn't speak to the press. 6 weeks later, he quietly published a letter on the Chordoma Foundation's website, recounting the entire journey. Millions read it. Thousands wrote letters back. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were donated to help other patients fighting the same rare disease. He began revisiting Mac's recordings to complete a second album, Resurrection and Revival Part 2. The project isn't just the final ashes of a gifted son, but a way for Gary, a father who had fallen into the deepest grief, to keep living. It's likely he'll never leave Nashville, the city they moved to in 2021 in search of peace, because, as he once said, Mac didn't go anywhere, he's just gone for a little while, maybe he'll come back someday. Gary Sinise didn't leave behind dozens of leading roles or a long list of awards like many of his peers, but he left something else, a profound cultural symbol, Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, and a real-life journey that far surpassed the boundaries of that character. Right after the film's release in 1994, the image of Lieutenant Dan, a legless soldier, lost, angry, and then rising to live again, became an icon of resilience for American veterans. The role didn't just earn Gary an Oscar nomination, it helped society begin to acknowledge the emotional wounds of war, wounds that had long been ignored or oversimplified. But he didn't stop there. For over 3 decades, Gary turned his film career into a platform to serve others. He didn't just play a soldier, he lived like one, devoted, steadfast, selfless, quietly fighting for something greater than himself. An organization with a heart. In 2011, he founded the Gary Sinise Foundation, one of the most impactful private organizations supporting veterans, Gold Star families, and frontline workers in the U.S. From building over 80 smart homes for wounded soldiers, to organizing free trips for thousands of bereaved families, to funding scholarships for children of fallen firefighters, every mission was carried out quietly, without needing him at center stage, only needing the right people to be helped. In 2019, the foundation even operated its own fleet of airplanes to fly Gold Star families to the funerals of their loved ones. These flights, called Snowball Express, carried no glory, only tears, white flowers, and a grief shared in solidarity. Gary once said, "If you have a voice, use it to speak for those who have been forgotten." That's why he hasn't returned to film, hasn't acted since 2019, and continues to turn down countless offers to stay home, care for his son, make music with Mac, and continue his mission of service. The band, the hand, and the voice. The Lieutenant Dan Band, founded by Gary in 2003, has performed over 500 shows around the world for American troops and their families. No fees, no broadcasts, no sponsorships, just a makeshift stage on a military base, the joyful eyes of homesick soldiers, and music that felt like a hug in the middle of war. In 2014, he and the band helped raise funds to build the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial in Washington, D.C. For Gary, it wasn't just a monument, it was a milestone, proof that those once dismissed as losers of war were now properly honored. In an entertainment world increasingly full of scandals, compromises, and political theater, Gary Sinise became a rare symbol. Unwavering personal ethics. He has not only been honored with artistic awards, like the Emmy, Golden Globe, and SAG, but also received the Presidential Citizens Medal from President George W. Bush, 2008, and the Bob Hope Award for Excellence in Entertainment for his contributions to the military community. But perhaps the greatest reward isn't a medal. It's the fact that millions of Americans, especially veterans, see him as family, as someone who didn't walk away when the credits rolled, as someone who stayed when everyone else left the stage. Gary Sinise didn't spark a cinematic revolution, but he lived a life that no film could ever write. Since 2019, Gary Sinise has almost completely stepped away from acting. He withdrew from film sets, turned down offers, and ended all long-term television commitments. When asked by the media, he offered a simple explanation: "I need to be home. My family needs me." It wasn't a retirement decision, it was a choice to stay beside his loved ones during their darkest years. As Mac, his youngest son, grew weaker after surgeries and chemotherapy, Gary became a full-time caregiver. No professional help, no special nurses. He pushed the wheelchair himself, fed his son spoon by spoon, massaged every aching joint. He was a father, not a star. After Mac's passing on January 5th, 2024, the whole family settled in Nashville, where they had moved in 2021, seeking peace. The new home no longer echoed with the sounds of film sets or drum practice, but instead, it carried the unfinished melodies Mac had written. Gary made a decision to complete them all. Just weeks after the funeral, he joined Mac's longtime friend, musician Oliver Schneid, to finish the second album, Resurrection and Revival, Part 2. They reopened every file on Mac's laptop, rearranged incomplete scores, brought in an orchestra, and invited Gary's former bandmates to record. Everything was done in Nashville, where Gary could work while also caring for Moira, his wife, whose health remained fragile after cancer treatment. Gary no longer tours. No more flights to Iraq, Afghanistan, or military bases like before. But he continues his mission in a new form, maintaining the foundation's work, producing tribute music, and hosting small gatherings for the veteran community. Mac's album was released under Gary Sinise Foundation Records, with all proceeds dedicated to chordoma patients and their families. In recent interviews, when asked, "Do you think you'll return to acting?" he replied with a gentle smile, "I'm not saying never, but right now, I don't want to be away from home too long. Here, I'm a grandpa. I drive my grandkids to school every morning, and I don't want to miss that again." In Nashville, the city of music, Gary Sinise now lives a life no longer defined by Hollywood, but by what's most real: family, memories, gratitude, and duty. He still shows up at military honor events, still wears a small Lieutenant Dan badge on his jacket, still shakes veterans' hands with both of his, just like he has for over 30 years. Perhaps in a world where so many stars struggle to hold on to the spotlight, Gary has become a light by stepping away from it. In Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan once screamed into a raging storm, questioning fate, challenging God himself. But in the end, he survived, stood up on prosthetic legs, and smiled in peace. No one could have imagined that nearly 30 years later, Gary Sinise would live that very life. But without special effects, without a script, without anyone calling cut. He went through a journey no role could fully capture, from a boy who struggled to read and missed his high school graduation to a passionate stage director. From a world-famous television star to a father sitting beside his son's hospital bed for 6 years without ever leaving. From a celebrity to a quiet builder of legacy. In a world where fame often feeds ego, Gary Sinise chose another path, to step back, so someone else could move forward. That's how he stayed by his aging parents, stayed by his wife during radiation treatments, stayed by his son as life slowly left him. And when Mac was gone, he didn't choose sorrow. He chose to finish the music left behind as the most sacred farewell. No Oscar needed, no grand leading roles. Gary Sinise still became a symbol, not because he stood in front of the camera, but because he stood behind those who had fallen and lifted them up. If you were ever moved by Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, then know this: that man is real. He didn't just play a hero, he spent his whole life becoming one. What are your thoughts on Gary Sinise's extraordinary journey? Which of his performances left the strongest impression on you, on screen or in real life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to discover more inspiring stories like this. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.